Hello, welcome to this evening's Mansfield Public Talk. I'm Helen Mansfield, I'm the principal here. We have some new microphones, so I hope that for those who've complained that they can't hear the Q&A, you can hear a bit better, because this evening's talk is going to be very well worth hearing. I'd like to welcome Sam Dubberley, who's the Director of Technology, Rights and Investigations at Human Rights Watch, a very large global NGO. And it's his job. I mean, you can ask questions about human rights from two angles. What is tech doing to human rights? And how can you use tech to investigate human rights? And he leads Human Rights Watch work in digital investigations and open source research to expose and document human rights abuses in the digital age. Before that, Sam worked at the Evidence Lab at Amnesty, and he's also established and managed the Digital Verification Core initiative, which has won lots of awards and was a partnership with global universities to train students to use open source research to investigate human rights abuses. He's been a research fellow here, research visitor here at the Bonavero Institute of Human Rights when he was working on the second edition of a book he co-edited, Digital Witness, using open source information for human rights investigation, documentation and accountability. So he's very keen on explaining how you can use digital sources to expose human rights abuses and to verify accounts of what's happening. He's going to talk for about 40 minutes and then we'll have a question and answer. So thank you very much, Sam. Oh, and I should have said this is this term's talk in conjunction with the Bonavero Institute of Human Rights, so I'm not sure which sticker's on the front of the podium, but it's both. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So this was the video that catapulted open source information and digital investigations into the public eye. It was filmed in Cameroon, near the northern border with Nigeria, at some point around 2014. It's horrible, it's cold, it's a bloodthirsty scene, and to be quite honest, it's not that unusual a crime. Not when impunity is involved, not in Cameroon at that time. 3 soldiers walk 2 women and their children down a dusty path, and they execute them. Now, I first saw this video in 2018 while working for Amnesty International. We decided that we could make this crime captured on camera by a perpetrator public. And we did, through a process of verification that we'd been establishing over the previous decade. We confirmed that the soldiers were indeed from Cameroon by checking their uniforms, their French accents, and their weapons. And we also worked to confirm the location. We did our bit at Amnesty. We published our report into the video and spoke to news outlets about it, even though the Cameroonian Minister of Communication accused us of spreading disinformation. Ultimately, some soldiers were arrested. But it was what happened next that truly propelled digital investigations into the public eye. The BBC picked up the video and showed everyone exactly why it was real, pulling back the curtains on the behind-the-scenes verification process. At Amnesty, we joined the broad coalition that worked on a film showing the exact location where it was filmed, identifying the specific time window, and uncovering the names of those who might be responsible for the killings. The BBC piece won prestigious awards, a Webby Award, a Peabody Award, and more, and demonstrated exactly what digital investigations could do to cast light on atrocity crimes that otherwise would remain unseen. By saying this, of course, I imply that open source information was something new. Of course it wasn't. In terms of visual information, we can go back to the first conflict captured on camera, the Crimean War. The photographer, Roger Fenton, took this famous image of the so-called Valley of the Shadow of Death, which the documentarist Errol Morris argues may be the first manipulated photograph of war, with the cannonballs in the middle of the road planted to make the scene look more warlike. A century later, the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963 was captured by an amateur filmmaker, Abraham Zapruder, and given immediately to the police as part of their investigation. In 1991, the beating of Rodney King by the Los Angeles Police Department was captured by George Holliday on a handheld video camera. But these were all quite rare, isolated moments, capturing moments of great significance almost by chance, with huge amounts of time between each incident. It wasn't until the 21st century that visual open source information got into the hands of everyone. The first camera phone was launched in the United States in 2002. I remember sitting in a bar in Geneva around that time, seeing one and thinking, what's that going to do? And just a couple of years later, showing why I'm wrong and work for an NGO, came a major milestone, the first video posted to YouTube from San Diego Zoo, a 19-second, somewhat dorky video featuring YouTube co-founder Jawed Karim. I'd invite you all to go and look at it and have a good laugh. Then everything accelerated. The Green Revolution in Iran in 2009 showed the violent repression of protesters in the streets after the election was stolen, while state television broadcast peace and stability. The Arab Spring and the conflicts that sprung out of it were entirely captured on video and posted to social media. In fact, video captured by the victims of abuses in the Syrian conflict has been so extensive that people say there are more hours of the conflict posted to YouTube than there have been actual hours in the conflict itself. For legal accountability, we saw a breakthrough in 2017 with the first arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for the Libyan warlord Mahmoud al-Warfali. 7 videos filmed by him and his acolytes were posted to Facebook, and they made up a large part of that warrant. While he never saw justice, he was killed in Benghazi in 2021, it brought digital investigations fully into the accountability space. Moving on to 2026, digital investigations now make news headlines everywhere. From the United States and Ukraine to Myanmar and Gaza, it's become a vital way of telling stories and revealing atrocity crimes happening worldwide. This is becoming all the more important in a world in which barriers are rising, walls are going up, and access of researchers and journalists is becoming that much harder. The freedom and lives of local journalists and grassroots human rights defenders are at risk like never before. Now, open source information and digital investigations have become so important for human rights NGOs and organizations pursuing accountability for war crimes and other mass atrocities that many of us came together to help draft the Berkeley Protocol on digital open source investigations. Published in 2022, it outlines a standardized workflow and procedures with which to conduct this work. The protocol defines open source information as public information that's accessible by observation, request, or purchase, and that requires neither illegal means nor special status to acquire. Basically, this applies to all the videos and photographs I've shown you so far. Now, this can include a whole host of data: flight tracking data, ship tracking data, supply chain data, and much, much more. And we use all of that at Human Rights Watch. Now, just to step back a minute. For those of you who don't know Human Rights Watch, who are we? Let me introduce us. We're one of the biggest human rights NGOs in the world. We research in over 100 countries with over 500 staff. And we have one simple goal, which is to investigate human rights abuses, expose them, and to advocate for change. It's a tried and trusted methodology that's served us well for over 50 years. And part of my team, the Digital Investigations Lab, is made up of 8 incredible researchers specialized in open source investigations, satellite imagery analysis, and large data analysis. More recently, we've also brought in 2 research technologists into the team as we understand the need to keep innovating in our digital methods, which is what I'm here to talk to you about this evening. For the sake of this presentation, though, I'm going to stick to the 2 forms of data we use the most, which is audio-visual information, images and videos, and satellite information. First, we look at videos posted to social media. For example, here, footage from Idlib in Syria, filmed back in 2019 at the height of the joint Syrian and Russian assault on the city. It was used by Human Rights Watch to reveal repeated violations of the laws of war that were apparent war crimes and may have amounted to crimes against humanity. And second, it means analyzing satellite imagery captured by commercial satellite providers and made available for purchase. Take our analysis here on the left of war graves in the Rwandan capital, Kigali. These were taken after the M23 armed group started their offensive on Goma and Bukavu in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in January 2025. The rapid growth of the military cemetery in that period stands directly against arguments by the Rwandan government that the Rwanda Defense Force had not at all been involved in the conflict. Similarly, a close analysis of the site of the US airstrikes in the town of Minab in the first hours of the US attack on Iran in February of this year shows why the military should likely have known that there was a primary school on the site they targeted, an attack that killed scores of primary school children. I should also flag, though, we make use of other data, huge use of other data, such as government data sets we were able to access through Freedom of Information requests. Take this example from US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, showing that close to 50% of Venezuelans deported from the United States in 2025 and transported to El Salvador's infamous CCOT, or Terrorism Confinement Center prison, where they were tortured, had absolutely no criminal record in the United States of America. What I'm going to do to show you how we do this work is use 3 case studies from what I would call the biggest conflicts of the past few years. What I want to do is show you how we've been using this information at Human Rights Watch in our hunt for accountability and justice for the victims of the biggest crimes. We'll be looking at examples from Ukraine, from Gaza, and from Sudan. These are all conflicts that are impossible or very hard to access without taking huge, huge risks. But they are conflicts that Human Rights Watch must investigate to reveal the crimes that are happening. Before I get to that, though, let me first talk about what we mean when we talk about verified information in the context of visual open source information. There's one term we say a lot in this area of work, which is geolocated. It sounds like a technical term. It really isn't. It simply means knowing exactly where a picture or video was filmed. If you remember at the start, I said that the Cameroonian Minister of Communication accused us of spreading disinformation around the video in Cameroon. But if we're able to report the exact street corner or hillside a video was filmed on, the ability of perpetrators to deny their crimes becomes that much harder. It's our key tool for rebutting such accusations. So let me give you an example. Here's a picture I took last summer. I have the rights to the picture. Just outside this room. Now, we all know where this is. We all walked past this scene coming here tonight. But if I want to geolocate this, I can say, well, look, here's a big, beautiful chapel. Here's a pristine lawn. And here's the apex of a roof. And I can see all of this on satellite. So I know where this picture taken And on a satellite image, I can pretty much define the exact spot where it was taken. This is what we're doing when we at Human Rights Watch say we have geolocated a picture. To be honest, I've heard this work described sometimes as spot the difference for adults. It's just that we aren't doing it in the centre of Oxford, where there's an abundance of information. We're often doing it in the middle of nowhere. So this is an example in the mountains on the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, where we documented Saudi Arabian border guards executing scores of Ethiopian migrants trying to cross from Yemen. Geolocating this image was a key piece of evidence to show that the Saudi border guards were deliberately targeting the migrants who they could see directly from their border guard posts. Now, I joined Human Rights Watch on the 24th of January 2022. Just one month later, on the 24th of February, Russia started its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. From day one, we were on the ground in Kyiv, and we've been present in the country ever since. However, for an organization of our size, the physical presence means one person. One person responsible for interviewing victims of war, conducting media interviews, meeting with government officials, and so on. Remote digital investigations using open source information have been key to our response in Ukraine. It's enabled us to document a wide range of crimes, from the killing of civilians and summary executions to torture, and much, much more. In those early days of 2022, it was the city of Mariupol, home to over 500,000 people, a city of culture, and the home of the author and playwright Nikolai Gogol, that concerned us deeply. As Russia besieged the port city, located on the Sea of Azov, we began to hear stories of it becoming a massive crime scene. When a bomb was dropped on its drama theatre on March the 16th, despite the word children being written in giant Russian script in front and behind it, as you can see here, and clearly visible from space, we all knew we had to investigate exactly what was going on. But we had, of course, no access beyond the siege lines. We were only able to speak to those who were lucky enough to escape. However, we also knew that videos were appearing on social media, in particular on Telegram. Telegram has been the primary source for videos throughout this conflict, and indeed, today, most conflicts. It has become the go-to social media messaging platform for the investigations we lead. On Telegram, we find videos and photographs filmed by bystanders to events, people whose homes have been bombed and destroyed. We find videos and photographs from perpetrators, just like the video from Cameroon I showed at the start. It acts almost as a channel for war trophy pictures, where military personnel, believing in their own impunity, show off their crimes. It's also become the channel for official communication from governments, local or otherwise, as well as activists and NGO groups. Telegram has been an invaluable source of information. It's also, quite frankly, a cesspit of content. So this is where we went to collect information from the siege of Mariupol. We collected hundreds of videos from Telegram, but also from TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, showing the destruction of the city as it was slowly taken over by Russian forces between March and May 2022. Doing this also allowed us to uncover powerful stories, such as the story of this building at Metropolitska 98, which you can see has been cut clean in two, seemingly by an unguided air-dropped bomb. This has sadly been a regular strategy during the conflict in Ukraine. We documented similar likely war crimes in other cities, such as Izium. A bomb dropped on the middle of a high-rise apartment block, killing anyone sheltering in the basement, with little apparent military advantage gained in the attack and no precautions taken to warn civilians to evacuate. Of course, the first thing we needed to do was to geolocate this video. We went about doing this just like the picture of Mansfield Quad that I just showed you. We looked at the defining features of the video and compared them to what we could see on satellite imagery, the height and the length of the 5-story building, the road layout, and also the telegraph poles. It all matched up perfectly. Even on the satellite imagery we could see later, we could see that the building with a wound ripped through the middle of it. A hole roughly 25 meters wide. Digging deeper, you could find out even more about this building and the people who lived in it to tell their stories. There were more videos from the night the building was attacked, flames ripping through the center of the structure, captured on videos on TikTok and shared on Telegram documenting the entire incident. Families had been sheltering in the basement. 17 of them were killed in the attack on March the 11th when the airdrop bomb ripped through the 5-story apartment building. One of those killed was 3-year-old Irina Antipenko alongside her mother and father. Done well, we can often use our open source investigations to reach the source of the video, the person who filmed it or shared it online, meaning we can then interview people. It was actually thanks to the open source investigation we did and uncovering the details of the building that we were able to track down these survivors and tell their stories and the stories of those they lost. In total, we verified around 850 videos from Mariupol. A comprehensive damage assessment of the entire city center around the theater was conducted entirely via video open source investigations. We went painstakingly through the process of geolocating each and every video we could find, showing the destruction and damage to buildings, even damage that was not visible from satellite imagery because it had affected the sides or the insides of the buildings, not the roofs. Because it wasn't visible from space, we reconstructed the most comprehensive damage assessment of the center of Mariupol and recorded that damage in the 3D models you can see here. In total, 93% of the apartment blocks in the 14-kilometer area around the drama theater were damaged in some way. Every single one of the city's hospitals was damaged. Residents were cut off from the entire city's water and electricity systems for months, and nearly all of the city's educational facilities were damaged. This damage assessment that we did, and that you can see here, shows the true scale, and it was this open source investigation that allowed us to show just how many buildings had been damaged around that famous or infamous theater. But it wasn't just the damage assessment we wanted to complete. One of the major questions from Mariupol has been about the number of people who died in the siege and in the invasion, the number of people killed in the fighting in 2022. Now, the number we were able to determine of those killed from March 2022 onwards was deeply, deeply conservative. But again, it was open source investigations that allowed us to make this determination at all, as there were few other records or methods for doing so. One of the ways we did this was by analyzing satellite imagery of the city cemeteries to see how many people were buried in and around the city in that period. We looked at the city's main burial grounds, in particular the Starry Krim Cemetery. On satellite imagery, we could see that clearly see that rows of new graves had been dug, seeing individual graves, but also trench-like graves dug in the soil. While we remained highly conservative in estimating the number of people who could be seen in those graves, assuming a single grave meant just one person, we were still able to determine that over 10,000 people were buried in Mariupol cemeteries between March 2022 and February 2023. When we compared that to the city's normal mortality rate, we estimated that at least 8,000 people died from fighting or war-related causes in Mariupol during that period. Now, as I said, this is a highly conservative number. Many people were taken to nearby villages, many were buried and remained in the rubble, and there are many people whose fates we still do not know. But just having this baseline number was, for accountability purposes, a very important piece of evidence. The data we collected and analysed was important evidence ultimately cited in oral pleadings at the Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights in the interstate case Netherlands and Ukraine versus Russia. But I think in some ways most importantly for us was the fact that upon publication of the report in February 2024, we received a letter from the mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko, thanking us and our research partners, Truth Hounds, for the work that had been done and for bringing the tragedy of Mariupol to the attention of the world. He said, thanks to you, the whole world has seen the consequences of the destruction and losses in Mariupol due to the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation, thanking us for our attention to the tragedy. When you're doing this work, it can be very, very hard. Receiving acknowledgement like this gives you the motivation to keep moving forward. Open source investigations have also been key to our response to the massacres committed by Hamas in southern Israel in October the 7th, 2023. We verified over 250 videos in our report into the crimes against humanity committed that day. It's also been key to our ongoing research into the events in Gaza thereafter. For Human Rights Watch, one of the first things we want to do in a conflict is raise attention to potential atrocities, atrocity prevention, if you like. And open source information, if you cannot access the site of these potential atrocities, is really key to doing that. When we cannot be everywhere or even access a conflict zone physically. Gaza is a case in point. Journalists outside Israel and Gaza have not been allowed, except when chaperoned by military embeds, into Gaza since the 7th of October, 2023. There's been no independent way to verify the information coming out. Therefore, open source information has been particularly crucial to move forward with these kinds of investigations. Satellite imagery has been really important here. What you see here is our attempt to highlight to decision makers what could potentially be happening. On the screen is a GIF of a tweet we posted showing satellite images of the exact same spot of land in northern Gaza, north of Beit Hanun, on October the 15th and November the 24th, 2023. It shows that olive orchards, glass greenhouses, and agricultural land had been completely razed and destroyed. We can see on the November the 24th image clear bulldozer tracks across the landscape where the olive trees once stood. Our report accusing Israel of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity by systematically displacing Palestinians in Gaza also relies heavily on the analysis of evacuation orders issued by the Israeli military. These orders, one of which you can see here, were poorly communicated online when people had no internet access, were unsafe, and were part of a broader policy that we determined could amount to forcible transfer or even ethnic cleansing, while, as we see here, military strikes continued on supposedly safe areas. And our report into extermination and acts of genocide through the deprivation of water, digital investigations was again crucial in making these determinations. Our satellite analysis shows how Israeli military actions severely damaged and disrupted water facilities, or in some cases, as this satellite image shows, directly damaged or destroyed water and sanitation infrastructure, resulting in most people living far below the minimum safe level of water needed for survival. But I want to just focus on aid delivery to Palestinians in Gaza. In June of last year, the world heard about hundreds of Palestinians who were killed while trying to get food from US-run aid distribution sites. Amidst a developing famine in Gaza, Israel blocked most aid from getting in and being distributed at the over 400 UN-led aid sites, claiming that the aid was being funneled to Hamas. In its place, Israel set up a new aid delivery system run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and at that time newly founded group with no track record in aid delivery anywhere and financed by the United States government. Suddenly, instead of 400 sites run by the UN, there were now just 4 locations, all heavily surrounded by the Israeli military. While people were being killed daily across Gaza, mostly in unrelenting airstrikes, it was a horrifying shift that people were now being killed on the way to and directly inside the sites. A few teams got together at Human Rights Watch to investigate the why, to understand what it was about this new aid system that was making it so lethal, and to push for change. We had to act quickly as the US was actively discussing increasing its funding to this new organization, while UN aid trucks were banned from entry and people were dying daily at and near these sites. While our colleagues started to interview doctors, witnesses, and former contractors who worked at the locations, the digital investigations team tried to gather and analyze as much data as possible to understand what was happening from space and on the ground. We analyzed all 4 sites using satellite imagery and videos. As you can see from this satellite image of one of the sites, they were surrounded by heavy military installations, and construction was finished just days before they first started distributing aid. They were designed with dangerously narrow exits and entrances and lined with razor wire that can shred skin, with Israeli armored vehicles positioned right next to the gates. We heard from former GHF contractors that the aid simply got dumped into boxes on the ground, as this satellite image captures, where it then became a desperate free-for-all. The fittest pushed to the front to grab what they could, while those moving more slowly, women, children, and older people, were left to sift through the dirt for what remained. Now, GHF communicated the opening times of these 4 sites exclusively through Facebook. Shockingly, they sometimes announced sites were closed before they'd even posted that they were open. So we decided that a full analysis of these opening and closing times was needed. We collected and analyzed all the openly available data on Facebook posts showing these schedules. And what we found was deeply, deeply disturbing. The average length of time a site was open to distribute aid was typically just 10 or 11 minutes before the aid ran out. This meant that thousands of people had to travel through a war zone with little to no warning to grab what they could in a 10-minute window or risk receiving absolutely nothing. The satellite images and Facebook posts clearly exposed a systemic problem. 4 sites surrounded by military, severely limited food, razor wire, massive desperate civilians, deliberately being starved. It created a chaotic environment where the fittest pushed to the front and the most vulnerable were left behind to scrabble for stray beans or strands of pasta. The sites were literal death traps. People were regularly killed at these sites as events got out of hand. So we then looked for video recordings of the exact moments things turned violent. Now, the GHF had told us, through their lawyers, that they never fired weapons at civilians, claiming they only fired warning shots directed upwards, into the air, and towards the coastline. Our video verification, of course, proved the exact opposite. We were able to geolocate one of the videos the GHF themselves had posted online to the Wadi Gaza site. And through a process we call chronolocation, identify what time it was filmed. Chronolocation can, as you can see in this case, be done by using the angles of shadows in a video as natural sundials. The analysis here confirmed the precise time and date the video was captured. From this video, we were able to confirm that a US contractor was firing shots directly towards Palestinians, not people waiting for aid. Sorry, toward Palestinian people waiting for aid. And these shots were absolutely not fired into the air. We worked on this report relentlessly for 3 weeks until we published the detailed report on the morning that Trump's envoy visited the distribution sites. The report became headline news. We also traveled to Washington to share these findings directly. We worked closely with US lawmakers who introduced legislation aimed at denying further US funding to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And finally, it was shut down in October of last year. Today, we continue to advocate for a safe, equitable, and functioning aid distribution system in Gaza. And finally, following an intense 18-month siege, Sudan's Rapid Support Forces launched a brutal assault that led to the downfall of El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, in late 2025. As the RSF closed in on the last remaining neighborhoods, they unleashed a pandemonium of violence, orchestrating mass killings of disarmed fighters and civilians on a devastating scale. We've interviewed survivors in refugee camps, interviews that confirm that the international community has profoundly failed civilians in Sudan, allowing a wholly predictable massacre to unfold. Now, just last week, we published a new investigation revealing that Colombian private military contractors, or mercenaries, were also involved. These private military contractors flying from Colombia to Sudan. These private military contractors were recruited, trained, and deployed to fight alongside the Rapid Support Forces and are implicated in these widespread atrocities, including the killings and targeted attacks on civilians, not just in El Fasher, but elsewhere as well. We verified and geolocated multiple videos and photographs showing Spanish-speaking fighters operating alongside RSF units in active combat zones, confirming their presence, as you can see here, during key moments of violence, including in the takeover of El Fasher, a period when abuses reached extreme levels. We also mapped the social media accounts and hidden metadata of these foreign fighters as they moved across the conflict zones. Despite the use of VPNs to mask their locations, the digital trail clearly places them transiting through the United Arab Emirates and Libya before arriving to fight in Sudan. That discovery in and of itself is quite the story. What are Colombian soldiers doing in a civil war in Sudan in the first place? It's quite disarming. But what is more disarming is that we found evidence that they transited through UAE military bases before being deployed. And we gathered this information again through open source investigation and the painstaking, time-consuming verification of one specific video. How did we uncover the smoking gun? It came from video evidence filmed and posted to TikTok by one of the military contractors themselves. As you can see here, the critical video is only about 5 seconds long. It simply shows a man running on a track, a few buildings, a couple of flags. That was it. Now, as you're all now familiar with geolocation and its importance, you can understand that a human being could analyze satellite images for a lifetime and never really find where that was filmed. We tried for weeks to verify it manually. We knew it was a vital piece of evidence, and we nearly gave up. But the team didn't. Instead, we took ourselves into the modern world and tried something brand new with our research technologists. We wrote a computer program. This deep learning detection model automatically processed satellite imagery that we downloaded of the entire United Emirates and asked to look for white lines. It took the machine 3 days to run the script that would have taken a human researcher months to analyze, if it were even humanly possible. And as you can see here, it worked. Thanks to this program that we wrote, we successfully geolocated the video to a military base in the UAE that exists on no map. The geolocation is a crucial piece of evidence that allows us to point our fingers directly at the UAE, helping to discredit their public relations campaign to portray themselves as regional peacemakers. Civilians in Sudan are bearing the horrific cost of a conflict that's being fueled not only internally, but through international networks of support. These networks include private companies, foreign fighters, and potentially, as we see here, state actors whose involvement contributes to ongoing abuses. Our goal with this report and the evidence we gathered is to call for comprehensive investigations into all actions linked to this support for the rapid support forces, whether they're individuals, corporations, or government officials. Where there is credible evidence, there must be real consequences. Targeted sanctions, legal accountability mechanisms, and a crystal clear message that complicity in atrocity crimes will not be tolerated. So this was a great example of the practical use of new technologies and AI in our field. But it would be remiss of me not to finish without some glances toward the future of this work and some of the risks, the tools that helped us geolocate this critical video from the UAE can actually pose to our work, and the real risks from both an investigative and a societal perspective, which is AI's role in undermining trust in evidence. In June 2025, Israel attacked the infamous Evin prison in Iran. We determined that the acts were unlawful, indiscriminate, and an apparent war crime. However, in the aftermath of the strike, footage circulated online of the prison gates being blown open, a fact that was reported on by news organizations across the world. It was soon confirmed, however, that although the strike on the prison had happened, this footage of the gates being blown open was fake and had been edited using artificial intelligence. So a real video of the prison gates, but with the explosion added on using AI. And we saw one other example from protests in Iran earlier this year, where another real video was manipulated to show protesters being hit by Iranian security forces with a water cannon. The video was real, the water cannon was not. There is an ever-increasing risk that trusted sources may be duped by and share images or videos that later prove to be fake, further undermining trust in our entire information ecosystem. However, let me conclude, please, on a positive thought. Technology has not only become essential to how Human Rights Watch works, it's essential to how the world works. Technology is building the rules for our future, and Human Rights Watch has a role to use that technology to investigate the real-world human rights abuses it can help reveal and increase the impact of our research. Thank you very much.
Sam, thank you for that. Amazing.
Sorry.
Amazing and,
Bleak,
and pretty okay, bleak. Yeah, bleak as well as amazing talk. I mean, one of the things that sometimes raises, well, why this, not that? There's a whole world out there. There's millions
Sure.
and billions of videos, probably. How do you decide which ones you put your limited resource into verifying, and are you therefore giving a fair view of where the really big atrocities are?
I think it's a question I'm asked very, very often, Helen. You know, as I said, the team is 8 people, and doing an investigation like the UAE one I showed takes the whole team. really. It's everybody coming together, bringing what they can, as well as that actually was a collaboration by 5 different research divisions at Human Rights Watch: the Americas division, the Africa division, the Middle East and North Africa division, my division, and our crisis and conflict division, right? And it was only by bringing everything together that we felt we could have impact. And that, it's this kind of, I said at the start, investigate, expose, change. So it's always this question about, okay, if we're going to do a project, what's the change we can hope to make happen with it? And that's the driver of the decision. So, October the 7th, we knew we had to respond. October the 8th, we knew we had to respond going onwards, for example. But in other situations, which is like the immediate response, but in other situations, it really is about how can we make change happen, is how we make that decision.
You've got quite a full room here and a couple of microphones, so I think I'm probably just going to because I can talk to you later. Yeah. I'm probably going to see if other people have questions. They have. I can see a hand down here, Rachel, and then here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sam. Just fascinating and incredibly important work. I'm interested to know whether you face challenges in this sort of open source information satisfying sort of rules of evidence and admissibility. I did some work a few years back around universal jurisdiction and trying to bring some of this evidence to domestic courts. And it was quite a few years back now. Mm-hmm. So there was a sort of, not only those challenges, but also a sort of unwillingness of some domestic courts to sort of look at the bit suspicion of this type of sort of evidence. I'd be interested to know whether that's changed. And then just your sort of penultimate point about reliability of things like satellite imagery and so on, and how on earth do you then figure out whether something is fake or not? I'd just be really interested to hear. Thank you so much.
On the admissibility, I think it is changing. I think we're getting to a stage where it's just kind of seen as evidence, right? I think I was actually at a workshop this morning at Blavatnik discussing exactly these questions. And I think, if you look at organizations like the IIIM, so the Independent Impartial Investigative Mechanism for Syria, set up by the United Nations, and the IIM, the same thing for Myanmar, they've spent a lot of time thinking about this evidence and how do we process it. The ICC, the Office of Prosecutor, also has an office dedicated to open source investigation. So it is being used, it is being submitted, and there's cases at the ICC where it has been submitted. And I think that's filtering through into domestic accountability proceedings. And there's a project run out of the University of Swansea called the True Project by Yvonne McDermott, which actually looks into this and kind of tries to set standards and does trainings with judges, and I've participated in trainings for judges and barristers in London. So it really is starting to come through, which I think is a good thing. On the counterbalance to that is this kind of authenticity problem that we are going to face when it comes to deep fakes. And I think, for us, it's this question of triangulation, right? So do we have an eyewitness to the events? Have we spoken to eyewitnesses to the events? Open source information on the other side is really helpful when you've spoken to eyewitnesses to check their memory, right? People who've experienced trauma have bad memories, right? Did it happen on Monday? Did it happen on Tuesday, Wednesday? Whichever. Actually, the open source information can help you confirm that. So for us, it's like, do we have an eyewitness? Do we have video? Several angles at this stage, because one is not enough, as we saw from Ev in prison. And do we have satellite image as well? And it's triangulating all these things together, I think, gives you the robust way to move forward on it. Yeah.
There's a person in red glasses here. You just hand the right, and then up at the back, Derek.
Hi, good evening. My question is more related to how you go about finding the videos and sources. So, for instance, if I were to look for something, a particular incident took place allegedly at this particular city, at this particular date. So how would I go about finding the videos? So for example, the Telegram challenge that you mentioned, the Instagram accounts, getting to the video, geolocating it, that seems understandable, but how do I actually go about finding the videos and in time before, in time enough to actually make change and quickly enough?
Quickly enough is a great point. Speed is not often our friend in this space. Like the Mariupol report I showed you, it took us 1.5 years to do. The UAE report I showed you took us 9 months to do. You know, it was one of those, we're going to publish this in 2 months, and then 7 months later you'd actually do publish, right? But in terms of finding the information, I think it's a really important question. So we approach it through a few ways. Like, I think, first of all, if we're talking about a conflict in particular, my question would always be, so which is the popular platform in where the country where this conflict is happening, right? So in Ukraine, it's Telegram. We know it's Telegram, whereas in Myanmar, it's Facebook, right? And it remains Facebook, and nothing's changed. So we'll start looking in those places first. Each of the platforms has a different way of searching, right? So in Telegram, it's about finding, you know, what's happened in in Ukraine was city channels would be set up where they would post content from their city. So there'd be a Mariupol channel, an Izium channel, a Kharkiv channel. And then you'd find, by looking at content from each of those places, you'd find new links and new links and new links. On the UAE piece we found, we had the name of one private military contractor, and we found his TikTok channel. And then we looked at who he was friends with on TikTok. And it turns out they were all mates with each other. Shock horror. And we looked at what they were posting, what they were posting, what they were posting. And then we found this whole picture of the activities of the mercenaries. I mean, the videos are insane. It's like, you know, Colombian guys in Sudan with like Mexican music playing of like, I'm going to work today, like a proper TikTok video from a war zone. So yeah, it's about knowing and understanding the different space, the different information space of each country. And thankfully at Human Rights Watch, you know, we have our country researchers who are like, okay, you know, Myanmar researcher, what's the channel we should be looking at? Peru, what's the channel should we be looking at? Things like that.
Okay. Derek?
Thanks. Thanks, Sam. You sort of just answered my question, which is about the UAE video and how people are so incompetent, but that kind of addresses that. I was going to just ask you then about how you work with other organizations such as Forensic Architecture, or if you do, and what the relationship is between those kinds of organizations in this kind of space. And thanks very much for the talk.
Yeah, really great question. Actually, the open source investigation space is really collaborative. I think we all realize, you know, the amount of information that's out there, the amount of work it requires to verify something or analyze something takes so long that actually we all work together really well, which is very different from, like, you know, traditional, inverted commas, Human Rights Watch researchers who are like, oh my God, that person from Amnesty might scoop me or something like that. Whereas we're actually all speaking together all the time of like, hey, have you seen, just to check, you know, have we missed any videos? Or is it like on the Minab school in Iran? You know, we were all talking to each other like, is there anything missing that we might have overlooked that's a really key piece of evidence? And so we're quite good at sharing that. And then on some of the bigger projects, we collaborate absolutely. The Mariupol project was a collaboration with an amazing group called Situ Research, which is basically the US version of Forensic Architecture. So do exactly the same thing, basically. And Truth Hounds, which is a local Ukrainian NGO, war crimes investigation NGO. So the three of us came together to build the whole Mariupol project. I'm doing another project with Forensic Architecture at the moment on mental health care facilities in the UK. To try and analyze, you know, some of the violations, human rights abuses that are happening in these care facilities using their techniques. So it's actually really very strong, which is nice.
So yes, just here and then here. Thank you. Just wait for the microphone, please, and people can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much for introducing your very noble work. I'm very impressed by a lot of things that you have shared during your talk. My question is, so the open source character of your work is actually, I think, quite important part that constitutes the nobility of your work and also what makes it possible to do what you're doing there. I mean, in that context, I kind of think about the context of the open source, which was originally coming from the software industry. And what is often pointed out in that context is that, well, I like open source softwares in general, but when it comes to the quality of the things, they're often not as competitive as a closed source softwares. in that respect, I'm kind of curious about your view on, so you're doing a lot of investigations relying on, I think, not only the open source software particularly, but opening to the wider community, the accessible data and such. Do you think there's a limit to limit in conducting your work because you don't have access to like closed source information that are probably secured by the governments or some closed bodies and such? This one question, and also another thing is, as you are helping humanity with the help of the open source community, do you also, I think you kind of partially answered the discussion previously, but do you also engage actively with inviting the people from the open source community to help your work?
Okay.
So on the first part of the question, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think, obviously we don't have access. There's a whole host of information. We often, I was telling Helen a story just before about, this video we verified from Syria. And we were so proud of ourselves for verifying it open source. But of course, when Assad fell and we could go to Damascus, everyone was like, yeah, that happened there. Right? It's like, we're so proud of ourselves for geolocating the video. Everybody in Damascus knew where it was. It's just we couldn't access them, right? So I think, we're trying to overcome barriers by doing this work, right? And how do we overcome those barriers where the information is closed to us? We did a piece in China about the destruction of mosques in Xinjiang province and how they were being kind of torn down and turned into other kind of buildings. Of course, we couldn't get that information except by satellite imagery. So we were somewhat guessing, but this used to be a mosque and now it seems to be something else. But of course, if we could get there and talk to people, it would be very obvious, yeah? And I think, on the second part of the question, the community is really great. Now, we don't, for a whole host of reasons, so much ask for volunteers, but there's great organizations, if people have heard of Bellingcat, for example, which it really is a community-led organization. It was one of the first open source investigations organizations that was set up around 2014. They've always been based on open source volunteers. So there's a lot of that kind of action out there. Yeah.
And then, yes, there. Yes, thank you. And then you might need to...
In the penumbra space between open and closed sources, have you had opportunities through political change where you can actually get access to what would normally be closed source? I'm thinking about phones, because this would tell you an awful lot that you don't know at the moment about me or anybody else. So, and do you think there will ever be a time when you can get access to that? Because you could then, it'd be much more granular and specific to particular people.
Yeah, I mean, for a variety of reasons at Human Rights Watch, we don't. But there are organizations that do. So again, going back to Bellingcat, there's a lot you can get on the Russian black market if you choose to, right? So Bellingcat's done a lot of investigations. They've chosen to do it. We wouldn't for a whole host of reasons. But they've done some great investigations looking at the poisonings of Navalny and stuff like that. And that was actually getting phone data, looking at FSB officers' movements from their phone data that they bought on the Russian black market. So the data is out there and it can be accessed. And then often data will, that should be closed source is leaked. Now, we wouldn't hack, we wouldn't get that data ourselves, but if it's out there and we can verify it, again, we will use it, of course. So it's often yes, or jein, as the Germans might say, but there's lots around why we wouldn't. And every decision is a kind of an ethical one of like risk and is it the right thing to do? Are we putting people at risk? The last thing we want to do in investigating human rights abuses is violate someone's human rights, right? So there's a lot of reasons why we won't, but there are kind of other organizations that will. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take that last question, then we're going to wrap up with the person in the blue shirt. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. My question is really about two parts. Like on the current part, you mentioned getting data, for example, from Telegram, from Facebook, but at the end, they are commercial platforms that, for example, exchange their API. So now there are differences in how much you can access. So on that one side is what is Human Rights Watch's view on like the access to this type of social media data. And the second is, as you said, one of the big challenges is really how do we work on scale. And therefore, if what are some of the abuse that your division or digital investigation has towards automation, while at the same time making sure that we remain precise enough, so that this can really lead to accountability, so that to avoid getting like false data in that regard.
Yeah. On the second part of the question, I think the reason, you know, I was like, okay, we need technologists in our team was exactly to answer that question. Right? It's like, how do we go from this idea of you find a photograph of the quad of Mansfield College, you're like, this is where it happened. You know, when I first started doing this work, we were very proud if we said, like, we verified 3 videos showing that this airstrike happened in Syria. It's not enough anymore, right? There's so much information out there that, you know, we'd actually be remiss not to be trying to use it, right, of the publicly available information. And one example is a report we did, published last month, on atrocities committed in Burkina Faso since 2022, since the military coup in 2022, by both sides, by the Burkina army, but also by the Janim, which is the Al-Qaeda link group fighting in Burkina Faso. And Burkina Faso State TV has a really good evening bulletin where it tells you all about the glorious actions of the military. And they put all of those videos on YouTube. There's about 40,000 of them. Now, with a team of 8, of course, we could watch those videos and like find 3 or 4 or something like that. What we were trying to do is build a chain of command and like position, you know, different military units in different parts of the country where we documented abuses. So we built a tool to scrape all 40,000 videos from Burkina State television and allow us to take the subtitles in those YouTube videos, translate them into English, and then built a user-generated UGI, general user GUI, general user interface, so we could manually search these videos, and it would take us to, oh, it mentions Captain so-and-so, or it mentions, you know, the northern province or whatever, and we can then say, okay, so that unit was in that place at this time, which means they're linked to this crime. That would have been impossible otherwise, without trying to do it at scale. And we're trying to build that out slowly. Now, it's something we've been doing for 12 months, so that's our first kind of like amazing way of doing it. On the first part of the question, I mean, it's a really tricky one. Of course, I want, you know, Facebook to be how it was 10 years ago, where anybody could go and find a picture of my kid. Do I want Facebook to be like that? Don't think I do, actually. So, like, a lot of the changes to the social media platforms have been for very good reasons, but they hamper us, right? People can't find a picture of my kid. Amazing. I can't find pictures of, you know, such and such a dictator in such and such in Myanmar or whatever. Less good. But probably on balance, that's a good outcome, right? So I think it just makes our job a bit harder. And I think the reality is people who want to, look at Iran, right? People who want to tell the world about what's going on, to people who want to share details about the abuses that they've suffered, find a way. You know, in January, people were putting videos and photographs on hard drives and driving from Tehran to the border with Azerbaijan and uploading them from there to social media. Deep risk, huge risk, but people find a way. So I'm less worried about the kind of the negative effects, if you like, on the first part of your question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for telling us something. I think that sums up people who really want to tell people what's going on so that you can make a difference, and helping those stories be verified and believed and got out into the public domain. It's amazing work that you do. So thank you so much for telling us about it and the way that you do it. Just before we thank Sam, next week is the last Mansfield Public Talk this academic year. We'll be back in October. If you have any thoughts, I crowdsource, so let me know. Any ideas you have for speakers. We've had a fantastic year and term of speakers. But next week, our last talk in the series is a Mansfield alum, a man called Simon Pummel, who's won a BAFTA for his filmmaking. And he's going to be talking about using a new film that's been out at festivals this year, Frankenstein's Dream, talking about 19th century visions of technology and fears about merging human identity and machines, using literature and outsider art and inventions that we have long forgotten. So from the cutting edge in a very depressing and important sphere to some of the fears that maybe some of them didn't really come true. But his work is very interesting, so I hope you'll come along, and please let me know if you have ideas for next year's public talks. But in the meantime, thank you, Sam, for a really fascinating.
Thanks for having me.